One of the most ruthless and brutal battles of the whole of the Second World War in Europe occurred in the final days of the conflict. Berlin, which had been for many years Hitler's Nazi metropolis, was now the scene of a major battle, and it was in ruins and in flames. The Soviet Red Army had pushed the German Wehrmacht and the Axis forces back to the very heart of Hitler's government, and within an underground complex known as the Führerbunker within Berlin, Hitler made preparations for his own demise and death. Around the remaining parts of the Nazi government was intense street-to-street fighting, and the Red Army lost roughly 80,000 soldiers, and the Germans, as well as losing 100,000 men, had to deal with the fact that huge numbers of civilians had been killed, and around 500,000 people were now under Soviet captivity. The fighting around the Reich Chancellery was some of the toughest, and some people even decided to die by their own hands, as they could not contend with the thought of a life without Hitler leading them. But one of the biggest worries for civilians inside of Berlin was the horror that the Soviet Red Army brought to the city, and their fearsome reputation led to many terrifying crimes being committed against specifically the women inside of the German capital, as they were subjected to horrific ordeals. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the execution of the German women of the Battle of Berlin, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. One of the last times that Adolf Hitler was seen above ground during his life was on his 56th birthday, inside the crumbling ruins of the Reich Chancellery buildings, the once hugely celebrated and grand Nazi governmental buildings. It was the 20th of April 1945, and members of his closest allies gathered around him, and it would be the last time that many of them met with each other, as they knew the war was coming to an end, and they tried to escape their own fates. The Soviet Red Army at this time had drawn up plans to encircle the city, and artillery was already firing on Hitler's capital, and striking many of the most famous buildings. But Hitler, inside of his bunker within the next few days, lost his mind, and admitted that the war was over for him, and he then made preparations for his own death. Inside of Berlin, the Gauleiter and Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, continued to try and inspire people to fight and give their lives for Hitler's cause. He made a rallying cry to the people of the city, and gave the people whatever they could to do this. Even children were armed with rocket-propelled projectiles to go up against Soviet tanks. One man who witnessed the chaos stated that, "On the walls of the houses we saw Goebbels' appeals, hurriedly scrawled in white paint. Every German will defend his capital. We shall stop the red hordes at the walls of our Berlin. Just try to stop them. Steel pillboxes, barricades, mines, traps, suicide squads, with grenades clutched to their hands. All are swept aside before the tidal wave. Drizzling rain began to fall. Near Biesdorf I saw batteries preparing to open fire. Where are the targets? I asked the battery commander. Centre of Berlin, Spree bridges, and the Northern and Stettin railway stations, he answered. Then came the tremendous words of command. Open fire on the capital of fascist Germany. I noted the time. It was exactly 8:30 a.m. on the 22nd of April. 96 shells fell in the centre of Berlin in the course of a few minutes. But what was equally as devastating as the Soviet artillery that fell on the city of Berlin was the behaviour of the Red Army soldiers that would enter the city. It was claimed that many Germans declared that all German women in East Prussia who remained were assaulted by Red Army soldiers, and with this information reaching those inside the city of previous war crimes committed by the men, there was a great amount of fear. The Soviet army had issued directives and orders for their soldiers to direct their hatred of the enemy onto those fighting against them rather than women, but this did little, and the discipline within the Red Army was very low. For many of the Soviets this was revenge, and raiding Berlin was the ultimate vengeance for the horrors that had been committed by the Germans who invaded their lands during Operation Barbarossa. Let's remember that the Einsatzgruppe, Nazi death squads, were in operation as soon as the Wehrmacht made advancements, and they would round up men, women and children, force them to dig large pits, and then execute these civilians in them. Many of the Soviet soldiers were driven by this need for revenge, and they saw the women inside of Berlin as their targets, almost raiding the castle that was Berlin of their princesses. They believed the actions of the enemy in the years before excused them to do absolutely anything that they wanted. One soldier even went as far as saying, "Our soldiers' behaviour towards Germans, particularly women, is absolutely correct." But this was large-scale assault on an unprecedented level, and no woman was safe. It was also said that the Soviet soldiers were assaulting every German female from 8 to 80, and these women who were caught up in the final throes of the Second World War, many of their husbands and partners and family members were forced to fight for Hitler's remaining Reich. What did not make things better was the fact that many of the Soviet soldiers were drinking whatever alcohol they could find, and they rampaged throughout the city specifically looking for women to inflict violence and assault upon. They committed scores of crimes, to the point where it's been estimated that around 2 million children were born to German women and mothers, and also Soviet fathers, with the majority being a result of horrific assault ordeals. The women were helpless, and the soldiers wanted to humiliate and take their revenge, and they saw them as a treasure to be taken or a trophy of conquest. One Soviet general said of the chaos within Berlin that a group of 35 provisional lieutenants on a course and their battalion commander entered a women's dormitory, and he then stopped because of what terror occurred there. Many women were killed at the hands of the Soviet soldiers too once they had finished with them. One Soviet soldier who was fighting near to Berlin claimed about when his men came across a number of armed German women that the captured German female cats declared they were avenging their dead husbands. They must be destroyed without mercy. Our soldiers suggested stabbing them, but I would just execute them. So those who were caught up trying to take arms against them were shot and were killed or executed in other ways, and the same man later claimed that, with horror on their faces, the women had just told me what happened on the first night of the Red Army arrivals. There were some shocking and abhorrent episodes of this played out every evening that the Soviet forces remained within Berlin. In one specific part of the city, Soviet officers entered an orphanage which was being overseen by a Catholic nun or a mother superior. The officers were said to have behaved well towards the women working there, but warned that the next wave of soldiers would not be the same, and when the second line came, the young women, old women, those who were pregnant, and mothers who had just given birth, as well as the nuns, were all terrorised. Lots of women were hiding inside of air raid shelters at the time too, and when the Red Army soldiers went near these bunkers, they were looking for women, and they ripped them from the bunkers, and selected those who they wanted to subject to a terrifying ordeal, before casting them aside in the wrecked, ruined city. Many of these women were also battered and beaten, but some realised that one of the best chances of survival was actually allying themselves with one senior Red Army officer, in the hope this man would offer some form of protection. One woman named Magda Wieland, who was 24 years old and an actress at the time, was ripped from a cupboard where she was hiding, and she was found by a soldier from Central Asia. She proposed to be his girlfriend in exchange for protection from others, but when this man boasted about her to his fellow soldiers, they all went looking for her. There were hours that were considered complete no-go hours for women in Berlin, and these were considered the hunting hours where Soviet soldiers went scouring the city for women to assault. Some of the earlier parts of the day were classed as safer, as these men slept in or were suffering with the night's drinking effects, but some women sacrificed themselves for others. There would be, as well as Soviet artillery crashing down on the city, regular harrowing, blood-curdling screams of women being heard. The impact on the hospitals was huge, as many women were sent there having been victims of the Red Army. One doctor claimed that there were 100,000 women who had become victims of assault in the city, and that 10,000 women had died from their ordeals. Many of them also took their own lives because of the shame of what they'd been subjected to, as well as the fact they could not live with what they'd been forced to experience. There were some men who did rise up in defiance of the Red Army and their behaviour, and they tried to protect women when they could, but these German men were slaughtered in terrible ways. Some were even hanged from lampposts, or were instantly executed by gunshot, and their bodies then left out for days. The state of the city was dire, and many women went to big lengths to try and prevent being victims. It was said by one woman who lived throughout the Battle of Berlin that, "The next morning we women proceeded to make ourselves look as unattractive as possible to the Soviets by smearing our faces with coal dust and covering our heads with old rags, our makeup for the Ivan. We huddled together in the central part of the basement, shaking with fear, whilst some peeked through the low basement window to see what was happening on the Soviet-controlled street. We felt paralysed by the sight of these husky Mongolians, looking wild and frightening. At the ruin across the street from us, the first Soviet orders were posted, including a curfew. Suddenly there was a shattering noise outside. Horrified, we watched the Soviets demolish the corner grocery store and throw its contents, shelving and furniture, out onto the street. The Red Army were causing terror across the city, and another woman said, "The frontline Russian troops who did the fighting, as a woman, you did not have to be afraid of them. They shot every man they saw, even old men and young boys, but they left the women alone. It was the ones who came afterwards, the second echelon, who were the worst. They did all the assaulting and plundering. They stripped homes of every single possession, right down to the toilet." The women of the Battle of Berlin are often considered forgotten victims of one of the final battles of the Second World War in Europe. As the doctor predicted, 10,000 women died from their ordeals at the hands of the Soviet Red Army forces, and in their final moments, they were seen as spoils of war. There were women who decades on could not speak about what they had heard or been subjected to inside of Berlin, and much of the stories of the horror of the Red Army they had heard about earlier were found out to be true. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.